Two. Hey there, Sheila Cahoon here and Mike Hawker. We are going to be talking today about another Monday Mortgage Mayhem. Right?
Mayhem.
Mayhem. Because
Yes.
mortgage is mayhem and real estate is mayhem.
It's all
Each and every week.
mayhem.
Anyways, today
Mm.
we're going to be talking about why shopping for homes first is a really bad idea. And I'm going to tell you why. And Mike's going to share some information about the pre-approval side of that. So, without further ado, we're going to hit on why do you have to be pre-approved first, and then kind of what's a buyer's consultation. They kind of go hand in hand. Pre-approved versus pre-approved amount, max amount versus the payment comfort zone, and then the other costs associated to the purchase of a home. So, I did want to first hit on this specific topic related to, because most people like to just get out there and start hitting on Zillow, looking for homes, putting their criteria in, right? And um and the one thing that they don't realize is that they will click that contact an agent that I had up on the screen, this one, and they will get bombarded with phone calls from agents. When you click that particular button, you aren't necessarily going to get the listing agent. And a lot of people think they will get the listing agent. That's not always the case. There are agents out there that pay for those leads. And so what you're going to get is you're going to get agents who all they do is sit on the phone and contact people. I mean, they do business, they do, buyers and sellers, but they pay for those leads. And so they will contact you pretty much on a daily basis, pretty much going to hound you until you work with them. And they may not do what I'm about to go over today. So my suggestion is to don't hit those buttons on Zillow asking to contact an agent, unless you want to just get hit with phone call after phone call after phone call from people. I actually tested this out on my own when I first got in the business, and boy oh boy, I told them, I'm like, I'm just testing this out. I don't really need anything, and they would not leave me alone. It was unbelievable. Even when you're telling them the truth, they still hound you. So you pretty much have to just threaten them that you're going to report them to the FCC, and then they'll stop. So but anyways, so on that note, don't click that contact an agent. Don't do it. All right.
at your own peril. You
Right.
know, you know, we were told that in continuing ed that, for on the real estate side anyway, the Zillows of the world, they're charging. I mean, some agents are paying, or agencies or brokerages are paying $10,000 a month.
A
And
month.
and there's some that'll pay 7,000 a month, and some that pay 3,000, and some that pay as little as possible, say 2,000. Well, all of those subscribers paying Zillow, you click that button, they're all going to get your information, but the ones paying the most money get it first. So they're going to scrub the list and bombard you. And then if they can work with you and they get you roped in, they'll work with you. If they don't, if they find out that maybe you put on there you have 700 credit, and after a conversation you come honest with them and say, actually I'm like a 550, they're going to throw you to the side. And then the next round, the seven people paying 7,000 a month are going to start calling you because you've been rejected by the high rollers. And then it's just going to go down. And that's why all these phone calls keep coming in, because all these different agencies are paying different amounts to have your personal information to contact you. It's
Exactly.
crazy.
Exactly. And so if you don't want to get hounded like that, simply don't click that button and find a local agent. Contact a mortgage person first, or look for an agent online, and then I'll show you what to do during that process. So the next thing we're going to go over is why it's necessary to get pre-approved, and that's why contacting a real estate agent, finding a local neighborhood real estate agent, is a good idea, or contacting a mortgage broker is an even better idea first. because a lot of times the mortgage brokers have people that they work with, trusted agents that they work with, and then vice versa, real estate agents have mortgage brokers that they work with. And the reason I'm telling you to go to a mortgage broker first is because we cannot, as agents, I mean, we can, but we're not, most of us aren't going to, we're not going to work with people that aren't pre approved. And here's the reason why. So, if this is an example, what if we looked at homes at 350 and you wanted to put in an offer? Well, I'm going to tell you, if you want to put in an offer and you're not pre approved yet, that seller is not going to accept your offer if you do not have a pre approval letter. They won't. They simply won't, because sellers are educated by their listing agents, and their listing agents are telling them you need to make sure that you only accept offers of people who have a pre-approval, because then you know that they can pay for or get a mortgage for the home that you have listed, right? So if somebody were to, in my example, look for a home at 350,000, okay, we're looking at homes at 350,000, and then you're like, okay, I want to put in an offer. Okay, well, let's go get you pre-approved now. Let's go get you pre-approved. And then we find out during your pre-approval that you can only be pre-approved for 250,000. Well, guess what happens now? One, you've wasted not only the agent's time, but the seller's time, because you've looked at homes in a price range you cannot afford. So you've wasted time looking at those homes, and you cannot put in an offer on that particular home. And now your criteria of what you can look for changes. And so that vision changes for you, and you have to adjust your mindset, because those $250,000 homes aren't necessarily maybe as pretty or as big or kind of what you thought. So you have to adjust things. And so what I'm saying is you kind of put the cart before the horse. You have got to make sure that you are pre-approved before you even step foot in seeing a house. And a good agent will make you go through a buyer's consultation. So that's my next step here. And why a buyer's consultation is vitally important when you are working with an agent, and why a good agent will essentially have you go through a buyer consultation. And it's not a bad thing. Like, it's very important for you as a buyer to completely understand the process of buying a home. So why should you do one? Why is one a must? Well, first of all, you should be interviewing agents, and the agent should be interviewing you. Because let's say you find an agent and you do a buyer consultation, and you're not kind of feeling it with that particular agent. You're like, I don't know if this one's the right one. You can then hold off from signing anything and go and find another agent and do another interview with another agent. Okay. You don't necessarily need to work with that agent. Okay. And it's the same thing an agent can do with a buyer as well. If they're like, I'm not sure this buyer seems maybe a little bit intense. Maybe they're not listening to me, whatever the case may be, they have the right to not work with that particular buyer either. I don't see that happening a lot, but it happens. It does happen. And then the agent should be going over the entire buying process with that buyer in that consultation. It's going to be a brief overview, because during the process, you revisit a lot of those things, but they explain to you, one, why you should be pre-approved and why we need to contact a mortgage person first if you are doing a mortgage. I mean, maybe if you have cash, that's not reality. But if you're doing a mortgage, then we need to introduce you to a mortgage person. So that should be the very first question, essentially, in the conversation. And you really shouldn't get mad if you're serious about buying. You shouldn't get mad at a real estate agent if they ask you that question, because a serious buyer will um, will understand why you need to get pre-approved, especially if you've seen videos like this from other agents. So understanding one, why you need to get pre-approved, what other costs are there involved, which we're going to go over in a minute. What other costs are involved in buying a home? What are the processes in the mortgage process? Getting all your documentation together, the appraisal costs that are involved in the mortgage process, and things like that. And then understanding like the different terms, that type of thing. Um, and then understanding the contracts. So people get all nervous when you're in a buyer consultation and agents are putting in front of you maybe a buyer's agreement, or an agency disclosure agreement. What that does for agents and buyers is say we are working together exclusively, because buyers agents work with one-on-one with their clients so that they can get them to the closing table. And they do that holding their information confidential to just themselves, right? So the relationship between the buyer and the agent, that information is transferred back and forth and it's kept between those two. Okay. If you don't sign with somebody, they could be sharing everything you're saying with the seller. And you don't necessarily want that. So being under contract with one agent is really a benefit to the buyer, in many facets, and we can go over that during a buyer's consultation. And then the last thing I will say is to set up that criteria search. So working with that one agent, you know, I've had this happen before where I've set the buyer up on a search, on their initial search, and um and that search ended up needing to be modified a little bit, because some people think that, oh, I want this and I want that, and then all of a sudden you put all those things in there and like, oh, well, I don't really like that, and so then you modify that criteria. Well, if you're just doing it on your own, you don't know what those criterias are that are out there, and how dialed down we can get your criteria so that you are seeing only the absolute homes that you want to see. So you're not wasting time looking at homes that really you're not really interested in. So all
You
right,
know,
and Mike, did you have any more thoughts on what I've said?
yeah, absolutely. On the pre-approval, you mentioned that certainly a buyer, if they're not pre-approved, they're not ready to work with you as a buyer's agent. They're not ready to work with the listing agent and the seller. They're not ready to put an offer in. And what about the emotional piece that a buyer is going to go through? Because most people kick the tires in the middle of the night or on the weekends. They start looking at houses first, because that's what's exciting, is to look for the house. Getting pre-approved, I think it's exciting. I love pre-approvals, but it's not typically exciting for most people. So you get excited about a house, and what if it's a Saturday afternoon and they are looking for, largest and best offers by Sunday night? Well, you're not pre-approved. You've not talked to a lender. Chances of getting brokers, we answer our phones on the weekends. Direct lenders, big banks, there's nobody to call to get a pre-approval on the fly. I need it right now. Now, I'm not advocating that we want to do Saturday pre-approvals on the fly. I need it right now. That's not
Right.
ideal. That's not really ideal for anybody. But
Exactly.
but we'll do it. But what about, you still have to get your documents, because there's the difference between a non-verified pre-approval and a real pre-approval. We have to verify income, credit. We have to pull credit. We can't just take your word for it, because then that's not an actual pre-approval. We have to pull credit, verify income, docs, liabilities, verify assets, verify all
Exactly.
this information. As a broker, I will prep an entire file, run it through a system called AUS, and give you an actual approval from Fannie and Freddie, which means it's half underwritten and going to close in record time. That is a solid pre-approval. The chances of you getting one on the fly because you're in love with this house are very slim.
Yeah.
Hopefully, even if it's a broker, hopefully they're available on that day, and not out of town. So the emotional piece of getting attached to a home and not being ready to put an offer in is terrible, and it's a bad place to be. So you've got to get pre-approved first. So anything you fall in love with, you're ready to strike and move quickly with.
Yeah. I've had situations where people have looked at houses without getting pre-approved, and I'm like, well, we can't do anything because you're not pre-approved. Like, I don't know what to tell you, and
Right.
we can't, yeah, this highest and best is happening, but you can't do anything because you're waiting to get that pre-approval from this mortgage person, and you need to send the documents, and then he needs to have the time to look at them and put them in the
Right.
system. So it's just really best ahead of time if you plan ahead to get that pre-approval done. All right. Now we're going to go over the pre-approved versus comfort payment. And oh my gosh, this to me is probably the piece that most first-time home buyers don't think about. They don't. And because I was older when I bought my home, this was a vital piece for me. And I'm so glad I did it looking back. Um, so I was pre-approved. I think at the time it was for like 180 or 160 or something like that. Well, I knew that I didn't want to be at my max. I wanted to be at like 120, 130 maybe. Because if something happened to my husband and I needed to swing everything on my own, I couldn't do the 160. And even though they pre-approved me, only me, I still knew that based on what I had, I couldn't do 160. So I bought a house at 120 and it worked out perfectly. Everything worked out great. So, Mike, can you just share a little bit of why that's important, and then how you come to that when you're speaking with the buyers?
Yeah, it's always important to find out what, especially with a higher rate situation that we have right now, finding out what payment will be comfortable for somebody versus just how much they can get pre-approved for. Because normally there's quite a gap. And so the first question is, all in principal, interest, taxes, insurance, what would you want your total mortgage payment not to exceed? And let's say they say $2,000. Okay, well, that's great because for some easy numbers, let's say somebody's making $7,500 a month in income. A conventional loan, just one example, we usually can spend roughly 45% of that gross monthly income as spending power. Well, 45% of 7,500 is $3,375. Well, let's say this buyer has absolutely no debt, no student loans, no credit card debt, no car payments, no debt whatsoever. That means they have that entire 3375 to spend. Well, in this market right now, that would be a loan amount of about $507,000. Now, does that person want a payment of $3,375? And that's just on the principal and interest? Probably not. They said they want their payment not to exceed two grand. Well, with $2,000, we always have to leave room for some taxes and insurance. I'm just for easy flat numbers, I'll go with $500. It might be a little less than that. That means you have $1,500 left for principal and interest on your bank loan. Well, in this same market right now, that would be a $225,000 loan. So I may tell a client, look, you're approved for a loan amount up to $500,000, but in order to have the payment you want to have, you need to be looking at homes that are going to give you a loan amount of about $225,000. Now, depending on how much money they have to put down, that might put them in the range of looking at a $240,000 house.
Right.
If they have $100,000 they want to put down, maybe they sold a house, they got an inheritance, something happened, then their home that they would look for might be $325,000. Put $100,000 down, you still are taking out a loan amount of $225,000, which will give you that payment you're comfortable with.
Exactly.
So we never ever max people out and say, here you go, you're good up to 500,000, go get them, Tiger.
Yeah.
We find out what they're comfortable with and we tell them to stick to that number. But at least they know that if they find a house that is a little higher out of that range, let's say it's another $50,000 more, but oh my goodness, I'll pick up a third job to make my payment more comfortable. Obviously, you can't get qualified on that, but at least you have room to go up a little bit, knowing your payment's going to be a little bit higher, but I still will give you the number to stick to so you don't exceed where you're comfortable with, because we don't want anybody to be house poor. We don't want anybody being losing their house after 6 months because they didn't realize how much that large of a payment was really going to affect them.
Exactly. I am more for not getting your max house than I am, um like, I want you to be comfortable with your house payment. That's more important to me than anything. All right. So I just want to reiterate, like, it's super important to make sure that you are in your comfortable mortgage payment than you are maxing out at a pre-approval amount. All right. Last thing we're going to go over is our other costs to purchasing a house. The other costs, and the reason I bring this up is because, and again, this is why a buyer's consultation is so vitally important, because usually the buyer's agent will know ahead of time if the buyer doesn't have this extra money to be able to do these things. And this happened to me one time. I didn't do a buyer consultation, and it came back, and it didn't work out. So the other cost of purchasing a home that people don't realize is you have to pay for an inspection. You have to pay for the inspection of the house, and depending on the terms, sometimes you have to do a re-inspection, or sometimes you have like pest inspection and well inspection and septic inspection and all these different costs that are incurred by doing just the inspection piece, right? Then you'll have repairs for those inspections. So there's another cost. And then you have an appraisal cost, which sometimes the mortgage company will have some ways to absorb that and things like that. Um, but in the end, there are ways to do concessions, and what concessions are a way to basically raise the price of what you're going to purchase the home for, so that you can roll those costs of inspection or appraisal or things like that inside the mortgage itself. So that's when you start to ask for seller concessions. So let's say if you were buying a house for 200,000, okay, and you needed to have the closing costs incorporated into your mortgage because you didn't have them. You didn't have that cash, right? You couldn't bring that cash to closing because you don't have it. What we can do is we can say, okay, instead of $200,000 seller, we're going to offer you $210,000 seller, and we want a $10,000 concession. What that does is it you end up having the purchase price of $210,000. The $10,000 comes back to you to pay for closing costs, and the seller gets the house for their original list price of $200,000. Okay. So those concessions are very important, and they're starting to happen now, even though we're in a seller's market. Um, they've happened more in the fall and the winter market, but they happen. And it's really beneficial for buyers who are struggling a little bit with that money to look at that side, to be able to help absorb those costs of inspection and appraisal and closing costs and things like that. Any last thoughts on that piece, Mike?
No, just that, and that works out well. Obviously, in that situation, the house would have to appraise for the 210, in order for the seller to have those funds to give back
True.
to you.
True.
So then, if the house, let's say it was for sale for 200 and you offered 210 because you wanted 10,000 back, and it appraises for 200, then what happens in your world, Sheila?
Well, then we basically can't get that house. If we do the 210, and this is, I'm so glad you brought that up because it is important to understand, like, is it going to appraise? Because the mortgage company will only give you what the appraised amount is for. So if it doesn't appraise for 210,000, then you either you back out of the deal, or which says that you can't get the financing for it, or you look at other gift funds that you could use to absorb that $10,000? Is there money in the 401k, right? Are there gift funds that you can get from parents? Those type of things. But before you put in that offer, your agent should make sure that they're that they do that CMA in the neighborhood to say, yeah, you know what, I'm pretty sure we're gonna get an appraised amount of 210. Like if the CMA shows that most of the houses are going at 200,000 and they're not going to get that 210, then they probably won't they won't advise you to put in that 210 offer. They may say, hey, let's do 205 and see what we can do. And could you get another 5? So that's what I would essentially do. But if you can't get that 210, if the mortgage company just it doesn't appraise at the amount, then you're going to have to back out of the deal. You'll get your escrow back as long as you show the seller that you couldn't get the financing. But in the beginning, the seller picks based on what they see the buyer can afford. So you really want to be in that strongest position you can before you put in that offer. And that's why all of this meeting with the buyer's agent and meeting with the mortgage person is so vitally important.
Yeah. There's a lot of negotiating, and you might even be able to, maybe when the house appraises or after inspection, you find that, the roof's on its last leg. It's got, um, it has an issue with the septic field. It's on its last leg, and all these things with anticipated costs. You certainly, can then renegotiate and say, hey, the house appraised at 200 and it has all these problems. I still want the 10,000. And if the seller agrees, great. Maybe you can renegotiate. But, trying to do all this on your own and trying not to work with a real estate agent when you have all this negotiating, and, agents know the ins and outs of what's problematic and what's not. They know how to negotiate what things are worth. To be on your own without representation for, especially on the buy side, just doesn't make any sense. You
No,
need a solid agent that knows what they're doing, that can help you navigate, and also help you not buy a house that they see things that you don't, and
right?
don't want you put you into the old Tom Hanks money pit movie from
Exactly.
the 80s.
Exactly. Enter Sheila. And
Enter Sheila
this is really
Cahoon.
why I focus to educate people on the buying process, on the selling process. I really try to educate everybody as much as I can, even if I don't know you, because I want you to be super informed before you get into this and looking at people and looking at homes and things like that. So without
Yeah.
further ado, I need to show you our information because this is how you're going to get a hold of us in the future. My information is there on the left. Mike is on the right. And any parting thoughts, Mike? I have to get out of here because I got to go to a closing. But any parting thoughts?
Um, just that, just that, get pre-approved before you shop for houses. Just
Yep.
summarize everything we talked about. Get with whoever you're going to work with for lending, preferably a broker,
Yeah.
and get that solid pre-approval in place, so you are a powerhouse out there in the market and you're ready to put offers, you're ready to back them up and put your best foot forward. The worst thing is to get emotional about a house and then lose it because your pre-approval, you couldn't get it in time.
Exactly.
So,
Great words.
don't put the cart
Cart
before the
before the
horse.
horse.
Blah, blah, blah.
Amen.
Yeah, don't do that.
Amen. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you come back every Monday and take a look at our videos. We love to educate, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
You too. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.